All right, folks, our agenda today is super simple. I'm here with Mark Stefan, who will present the committee's findings, and Sol Mora from our advocacy committee, who will step us through a quick visual explanation of how multi-member proportional representation works. That's a mouthful. Multi-member proportional representation. She's got a slide deck for all of us visual learners. And after that, we'll go out to breakout sessions so that as City Club members and members of the community, you can talk about what you've learned and what questions you might have. If you need any accommodations for the breakout, accessibility for breakout rooms, please share that with Kayla Kennett in the chat. We will end with a Q&A with Mark, Sol, and also with a special guest, Jay Lee from the Sightline Institute. Finally, once all the talking is over, if you're a City Club member, you'll get a chance to vote on whether to adopt or reject the latest research. This is a tradition that goes back more than 100 years, and it's what determines whether City Club is able to advocate for the research findings. It is one of the most important privileges of membership, and I'm really excited that we have an opportunity to vote on such an important topic today. After today's event, if you are a City Club member, you will receive an email that will allow you to cast that vote. If you think you're a City Club member, but you didn't get an email, send a message to info@pdxcityclub.org, and we'll figure out what's going on. Okay. A little about our discussion today. I said you were going to hear from me a long time. This is what we got. City Club has been leading the way on charter reform since 2017. This investment over the last 5 years has included 2 member-led research reports, an advocacy committee that has developed and shared a social media public education campaign in partnership with the Coalition of Communities of Color and Next Up, monthly events with the charter commissioners, and a growing email list of more than 1,000 community members who care about changing the city's form of government. On March 31st, next week, the Charter Review Commission is poised to issue recommendations that largely mirror the findings and recommendations of City Club's reports. So what are we doing here today? When City Club released our 2 member-led research reports in 2019 and 2020, they each got more than 90% of members voting to support them. And they recommended 5 basic things. 1, a transition to a modified city council manager form of government. 2, increasing the size of city council. 3, adopting a voting method that eliminates the need for a primary, such as ranked choice voting, or another method that allows for proportional representation. And 4, the focus of today's discussion, switching to some form of district-based elections. The final recommendation from these reports was that the City of Portland invest financially in deep civic engagement during the charter reform process to better understand how to get more granular on all of those policy recommendations, and especially on the recommendation related to districts. Well, the City of Portland did invest in deeper civic engagement, and I think that's something we can all be really happy about. Over the last 1.5 years, the Charter Review Commission engaged City Council members, bureau directors and staff, city employees, neighborhood groups, culturally specific community organizations, and activists to hear different perspectives about how to reform our form of government. They received 915 public comments, had 26 listening sessions with 580 people, and collected more than 4,000 responses from 2 multilingual surveys. They did a lot of this work in partnership with the Coalition of Communities of Color. So this winter, City Club's research committee requested a chance to reconvene and to review all of that information and also new research, and to consider whether or not all that new data should prompt them to amend their recommendation from 2020. 8 days ago, our board met and reviewed their proposed amendment, and after today's meeting, members will have an opportunity to vote whether to approve or reject it. Phew, that's all the background. Mark, I would love to invite you to join me and tell us all a little bit more about what spurred you and the committee to want to take another look at your research.
Thank you, Caitlin. I think the first place to start here is that our committee that focused on the electoral reforms, finished it up 2 years ago. It's been 2 years, full year since we last did our writing. And in the world of electoral reform and research, things keep moving, things keep rolling. What's also true is that in the first report, we said that one of the things that we really think, what City Club really thinks that we should do is get more information from throughout the city, but in particular from marginalized communities, historically marginalized communities. And we've now started to get that information. The commission itself has been getting a lot of that information. City Club has gotten that information. It's more available. And so all of those things sort of feed into this. And then there was a particular report that focused on Portland, and it was focusing on different voting systems in Portland. And though we didn't, adopt that report in any sort of way, we did look at it, and that was the particular thing that spurred us to say, hey, we need to sit down, take our collective wisdom at this point, collective knowledge at this point, I should say, and review what we've already talked about.
And can you say as crisply as you can what you are recommending City Club members adopt today and why?
Yeah, after some discussion and back and forth, it basically came down to sort of three things. And a lot of this is in the writing of this as well. We're reaffirming the belief that multi-member systems, and in particular multi-winner multi-member systems, are the best way to go for Portland, because they do bring this notion of proportionality, meaning that more peoples in different districts around the city can be truly fully represented. We can expand representation for more of the city. Second, we strengthened our original critique of single member districts that at first we kind of hedged a bit, but now we're not hedging. They can't do what needs to be done around diversifying our public officials and also, again, diversifying representation so more people's voices are being heard. And then we clarified a smaller detail, but an important one, that at-large systems can come in different forms. And we didn't clarify that well in the original report, but we also found that because it didn't meet some of our criteria for geographic representation, that it wasn't sufficient. So again, we go back to the focus on multi-member systems that are multi-winner systems.
Give a little bit more clarity about the difference between a multi-member and multi-winner districts. I know that's something that your committee really dug into. Yeah,
so I think let's start with multi-member. A multi-member district, actually we have examples. Something like the US Senate is a multi-member district where the whole state of Oregon has 2 senators. They both represent the whole state, that district. But think about Portland, we might have a part of Portland where there may be 3 people who represent that district, that area. They all do it in combination. Multi-winner means that we elect them all at the same time. They're all the possibility of being winners at the same time. And what that means is that process of doing it at the same time in combination with the other nominees means that we diversify the set of voices that are being heard in a particular district. And I can talk later about in the Q&A a little bit about how that actually works.
So your committee, in the first 2 reports, there were 5 recommendations, and your committee is amending just one of those 5, the one that's focused on districts. Great.
Say that again. I got thrown off by something in the chat. I want to respond to that because it's directly relevant, but say that again real quick.
I just was saying that the first 2 reports issued 5 recommendations, and your committee is amending a single of those 5, the one that is focused on districts. Great.
Yeah. We feel so much of the original reports really have held up over the last 2 years, and even the differences, the changes that we're asking for you now are not huge shifts in where we were 2 years ago, but they are truly shifts. And to clarify, as someone said in the chat, yes, it's true that senators don't run against each other, but that's the difference between theirs is not a multi-member, multi-winner system. Theirs just is a multi-member system. The multi-winner are when they are elected on the same list of candidates at the same time. That's the difference.
Wonderful. I want to invite Sol Mora to join us. I think that Sol will help us visualize how this works. Hi, Sol. Nice to have you here today.
Hi, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here. I do have a slide deck prepared. Kayla, if you can please pull that up, that would be great. And I did see some questions and comments in the chat. Hopefully the slide deck helps to clarify some of that, but we will also have the question and answer session. All right, thank you, Kayla. So I'll just start with an introduction. My name is Solmora. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Civic Engagement Manager at the Coalition of Communities of Color. We currently are partnered with the City of Portland on community engagement efforts to engage Portlanders in the charter review process. So that is one of the hats that I wear. I am also part of the advocacy committee with City Club, in which we do those community engagement efforts. I don't see the presentation up.
I'm sorry, I was having a hard time doing it while recording the meeting, so I'm gonna have to pause recording to do it in full screen.
Kayla's in the high pressure role of managing all of the technology, and we love you. Thank you, Kayla.
Full screen.
I can also put the link in the chat if maybe Caitlin, you can share it out. Does that work as well?
What do you think?
Oh, there we go.
Great.
Got it.
Nice.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the next slide. So one of the first things that I wanted to chat about today is really going over what our current city council elections look like. So when we talk about our city council elections, there are three key things that affect how we currently vote: constituency, voting method, and the voting system. So the word constituency refers to the people in an area that a leader represents. So a leader could either represent the whole city, or they could also represent a geographic area of that city. Right now in Portland, the mayor and the 4 city commissioners represent Portlanders as a whole. So that means that they run for office citywide. And those open seats for city commissioner get marked into different positions, 1 through 4. And the current voting method that we use is called pick one voting. So pick one voting means that as a voter, when you receive your ballot, you're only able to mark one candidate for each of those different positions. So how is the winner actually determined using this method? The current voting system that Portland uses is called a winner-take-all system. So a winner-take-all system means that candidates need more than 50% of the vote to win, or they can also win with the biggest amount of votes. And there is only one candidate that wins per race. So if a candidate wins with more than 50% of the vote in the May primary, they get elected instantly. However, if you don't get any candidates that actually reach that 50%, the top 2 vote getters would then move on to the November general election, and there the candidate with the most votes would win. Next slide. All right, so today we are talking about what some of the alternatives are to candidates being elected citywide. Mark, thank you for already, creating such a great explanation to what those multi-member districts can look like. Hopefully this graphic also helps to put it more into perspective. So multi-member districts are a specific model in which more than one elected leader represents each district. So here you can see we have District 1, District 2, and District 3, and there would be 3 elected leaders representing each district. So if you are a voter that lives in District 1, you can only vote for the candidates that are running for office to represent your specific district. And then once those candidates do get elected, it means that you have more than one representative to represent you and your community needs. So one of the things that Mark alluded to earlier is recent research from the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group Redistricting Lab, very long name. And they did some research based in Portland in which they found that voters of color are too spread out to draw a district in which voters of color are the majority. So because of that reason, single member districts are not a model of district representation that would truly allow voters of color and other disenfranchised voters to elect a candidate of their choice. The research also found that multi-member districts instead increase the chances that minority voters will be able to elect a candidate of choice. Next slide. All right, so now that we have that district model in place, let's go ahead and talk about what the options are for the voting method or what you see on your ballot. So the Portland Charter Commission right now is considering ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting gives voters one vote, but as a voter, you are allowed to rank the candidates in your order of preference. So with this example ballot that you see here, as a voter, you would be able to determine who your top choice candidates are. So here, let's say that candidate B is your favorite, and so you are going to mark them as your first choice. And then let's say candidate C is your second choice, and so you will mark them in that spot, and so on. You don't have to mark something for every candidate. It really is up to you how you would like to express your preferences. So the thing about ranked choice voting is that if your first choice doesn't win, you have other candidates that your vote can count towards. So let's say candidate B actually got eliminated in this scenario, your vote would actually be distributed to your next choice candidate. And so now it would go for candidate C. Next slide. All right, so doing this in different layers, we covered the district model, we covered the voting method, and now let's talk about the voting system. So the voting system is how the winner actually gets determined. So proportional elections are a voting system that ensures minority groups a measure of representation to their share of the voters. There are two types of voting systems that are most commonly used. You can have a winner-take-all system, which we talked about earlier, and you can have a proportional system. Proportional systems elect multiple candidates in one election at the same time. So rather than dividing those seats for the city council into different positions, all the candidates are running in the same race at once, and there are multiple winners. Proportional elections don't rely on one candidate needing 50% or more of the vote to win. So instead, a formula is used to determine what that number of votes a candidate needs to win is. The amount of votes needed to win is often called a threshold. And so candidates that meet that threshold then win the open seats to city council. So here we are looking at the most common type of proportional elections that exist in the United States, which are proportional ranked choice voting elections. So under proportional ranked choice voting, it's the top ranked candidates who win that election. So let's say that there are 3 open seats here that we need to fill. It's the top ranked candidates that would fill those seats. So let's take a look at this example election and go through it. Let's say that the threshold here is candidates need 20% of the vote to win. Here you can see that candidate A meets that threshold, and so they win a seat to city council. You will also notice that candidate A actually received extra votes, and those extra votes put her over the threshold total. And so if a candidate does receive extra votes and they don't need those to win, those extra votes will go to the candidates that those voters marked as their next choice. So let's see what happens when those votes are redistributed. So here in this graphic, you can see that the votes have now been redistributed to those voters' next choices. So candidate C and candidate D here were those next choices. So they are the ones that get the extra votes. Candidate C now actually meets the threshold, and so they are able to win the second seat to city council. So you might be wondering, well, what happens to the other candidates? No one else met the threshold. So if no one else does meet that threshold after votes get redistributed, the candidate with the fewest amount of votes will get eliminated, and their votes go to their voters' next choice candidate. So here you can see candidate E has the fewest votes, so she gets eliminated. Her extra votes then go to her voters' next choice candidate, which is candidate B. So candidate B now meets the threshold and fills the last open seat to city council. So this process would just continue until all of those seats are filled if you had more than 3 open seats. Next slide. All right, so let's bring all of those pieces together that we talked about. So if we have a model that uses proportional ranked choice voting within multi-member districts, what does that look like? So you will notice that this graphic is still very similar to the one from earlier. So here, each district would elect multiple winners to represent their area. But within each of those little districts, there would only be one race rather than dividing the seats for city council into different races. So every candidate running to represent District 1 would show up on your ballot if you are a voter of that district. And using a ranked choice ballot, you would get to place candidates in your order of preference. After that happens, candidates who reach the threshold of votes needed to win will get elected in that district. If no candidate reaches that threshold, the candidate with the fewest votes gets eliminated, and whoever voted for that eliminated candidate would then have their vote redistributed to their next choice candidate. So again, this process, like we just saw in the other slides, it repeats until another candidate reaches the threshold and all the seats are filled. That formula that determines how many votes a candidate needs to win would be based on each district. So it looks at how many voters turned out in the election, how many seats you need to fill, and that's how you're able to create that threshold number. And each district would have its own threshold number because they are different elections that are happening within those districts. I know that was a lot to take in, so I am happy to turn it over to our question and answer session.
Thank you, Sol. Really appreciate you stepping us through that. And it was great to see all of the questions that your presentation prompted. Sometimes we don't know what questions we have until we're beginning to really think through all the steps in this. We are hoping to be able to get to everybody's questions in our Q&A session at the end of the event today. We will prioritize questions that are focused on districts and method of voting, although I do see a bunch of questions in the chat about form of government related to council manager or strong mayor, weak mayor forms of government. The first report addresses those. We don't have any committee members here today who can talk to those recommendations. But before we move forward with the Q&A, we're going to quickly go to breakout sessions so that as members, you have a chance to talk through with each other what you've been hearing and begin to develop questions. In your breakout sessions, you will have a link to a Google Doc where you'll see that I've begun to grab questions from the chat and populate that Google Doc for our Q&A. You are going to be randomly placed in a breakout room with a handful of other people. It's sort of like being randomly placed at a table at lunch with folks you've never met. I hope it's a great chance for you to meet other members of the community. A quick note for our breakout sessions about persuasion and civic communities. If you are here with a specific advocacy agenda, rather than to learn and hear diverse perspectives, that's awesome. We love everybody being here together, but please feel free to share your thoughts and then step back and allow the conversation to move forward so that everybody can learn. Okay, Kayla is going to start sending you to breakout rooms. We'll be back at exactly 12:40. Okay, well then if we're all here, let's get Mark and Sol and Jay all pinned at the front of the room and invite guests. I'm going to bounce back and forth between audience questions and live audience questions and questions that were asked earlier in the chat. For those who are in the audience, I can't see you if you raise your physical hand, but if you go to the reactions button, which is the little smiley face at the bottom, the big space bar that says raise hand, if you click on that, you will be moved up to the front of the line and I'll be able to see you there. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I'm gonna click over to all the audience questions that we started getting in the chat earlier and start with one of those while we're waiting for people to queue up. One question that came through is what other US cities are utilizing these methods? And this seems like a great opportunity to introduce Jay. Jay, can you take a crack at that?
Yeah, hi everybody. So there's a couple different parts of this. One of them is this multi-member district idea. That's used in a couple of different places. Cambridge uses one big multi-member district that sort of covers the entire city. So like Sol was describing how like the state of Oregon has 2 senators. Cambridge has 9 councilors that they elect with, Cambridge, Massachusetts, sorry, has 9 councilors that they elect across the whole city. There's a couple other places that use it. There's a town called East Point in Michigan that has multi-member elections like this. Palm Springs, California has to introduce it now. Both of those are Voting Rights Act cases. This is what the country of Ireland uses for their legislative elections. So that's some of the places that use these multi-member systems.
Great, thank you. Ashley, I see your hand raised. Ashley Henry with Better.
With Business for a Better Portland, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about how this would be referred to the ballot. I, for the first time, heard in our breakout session while we were trying to figure out how to navigate the Google Doc that these matters may be referred individually and there would be individual votes for people to take in November, that we would not necessarily be voting on a package of changes. I'm confused about that.
Sol, can you grab that question?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this one. So currently the Charter Commission has not come to an actual conclusion on how those packages would be divided out or if they will be together. From my understanding, I think they are leaning towards having that be in a package. So let's say that we're looking at, you know, the city council elections changes and the form of government changes. I do think that one option would be to pair all of those things together so that they are included in one ballot measure. However, they are still, you know, making decisions on this specific piece. They're releasing a progress report tomorrow. So I'm hoping that will potentially include some more information about this. But as of right now, there hasn't been an actual formalized decision on how those things will be, you know, put together or separated.
We have a Charter Review Commissioner in the chat who's confirming that, Sol. I'm going to ask a question from Jonathan Rodmacher, who chaired our Campaign Finance Reform Research Committee a year ago. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan asked in the chat, the charge discussed diversifying the City Council's reflection of race, income, and geography. Did the committee either this winter or in 2019, 2020, did the committee also consider whether the proposal would increase political diversity? Mark.
Yeah, I mean, the best answer here is yes, we can leave it at that. But what I mean when I say yes is that we thought about all the different ways in which representation would be improved. The issue about political diversity wasn't, or ideological diversity, I think is part of what you might be getting at, wasn't, you know, a criteria for our evaluation, but we thought through multiple ways of thinking about representation. And honestly, political representation was part of that conversation. Our sense was that that the changing the structure will change the number of voices that are heard, and the number of voices that are heard will widen with a multi-member, multi-winner system.
Tom Dyke, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you, Caitlin. Yes, Tom Dyke, City Club member. First, I'd like to congratulate the research committee on great work. So I really appreciate that. I do have one question though, and that is, under a single pass ranked choice voting system, is it possible that the voters will not be able to really focus on the qualifications of candidates? I mean, if they see a large number of folks on the ballot, I worry a little bit that there won't be enough time for people to focus on the candidates.
Jay, you live in a political system in Washington, I believe, that has a, no, you're in Oregon. All right.
Oh,
well,
yeah, I live in Portland. Sorry. First time I have to
Darn it.
apologize for that.
Okay, I thought you'd have real life experience to offer to Tom's interesting question. Well, Jay, do you want to pick that up, or Sol, were you raising your hand?
Yes, I can try and answer this one, and then Jay, if you have anything to add. So one really interesting thing about the research that has been done on ranked choice voting as a voting method is that it actually shows the complete opposite, that voters are more willing to research all of the candidates. There is a lot more participation that goes into those interactions. And I think one of the reasons, and this is something that personally, when the Coalition of Communities of Color did community engagement with folks, we heard this a lot. If you don't know how the current system works, if you just don't have that experience with voting, a lot of the time folks will just vote for the name that they hear the most, right? So if you are someone that doesn't have the same type of access to the voting materials, you just have to pick one candidate. And so it is a little bit, simpler to just say, hey, I'm going to vote for this person. When you're able to actually express your preferences, again, that's something that showed that voters are actually, able to research the candidates a lot more. And another thing on the end for candidates is that they actually benefit from building positive coalitions with one another, because if the voters that are placing you as your first choice, if you are sharing a specific priority or agenda with another candidate, it actually benefits you to also get the support of their voters so that they will mark you as their second choice. So it goes back and forth in that way, in which candidates are actually focused more on wanting to share what their platforms and values are with voters, and voters are able to learn more about the candidates.
Could I ask a short follow-up?
Sure, go ahead.
Do you know, in the cities you mentioned that adopted ranked choice voting, do you know what the ballots actually look like? That is, do voters generally see a large field of candidates, or would they see a smaller field?
I could chime in on that one. It's been mixed. It depends on what the ballot access looks like in any of these places. Portland has, I haven't looked at candidate filing recently, either some sort of filing fee or petitioning system to actually get a candidate on the ballot. In the various places that have done this, a lot of the times what voters will see is a grid on the ballot. And so there's a grid of candidate names and rankings in the columns. And so you're still going to end up bubbling in these choices. I don't exactly know what the ballot's going to look like yet. That's going to be up to the Charter Commission in consultation with the county clerks. But some places limit the number of rankings that you can put as well. For up until very recently in San Francisco, which used ranked choice voting, you could only rank 3 candidates, regardless of how many were on the ballot. So it'll depend on what the Charter Commission decides and what the clerks are able to do.
Great,
Sam
thank you.
Metz.
Oh, thank you, Caitlin. I really appreciate the work on this. I have a question. I think I missed something vital. If we want to increase diversity of representation on the council, and the currently disenfranchised voters are scattered throughout the city, then dividing the city into districts means that each district will elect the 3 most popular people. In my vision, this would reduce the diversity of the council as opposed to choosing 9 people from across the city. What am I missing in the advantage of dividing the city into geographic districts?
Great question, Sam. Mark, I'm going to toss this one to you first. My guess is that Sol and Jay might both want to weigh in.
Yeah, Sam, the best way to think about this, at least for me, is like a particular example. And this comes out of my breakout session. Actually, you were, I think, in on that session. So, you think about people who are tenants, who are, who rent, or people who own around the city, and they have somewhat different interests some of the time. If there were, let's say, 9 single member districts and tenants were always just barely a minority of the people in that district, they would arguably, in theory, lose every time, right? In a multi-member district, there would be a chance for them to sort of build up enough numbers to be able to have one of 3, for example, that is someone who supports their interest. The multi-member district with the multi-winner system allows for them to, that's the notion of proportionality playing out, actually. But if it's dispersed in the way you're talking about in a single member district, you don't get that kind of diversity shift that you
Mark,
want to see.
That wasn't my question didn't come out well. It's not a question of single member district versus multi-member districts, but why have multiple districts with multiple winners as opposed to a single citywide district with multiple winners? That didn't come out right the first time. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And Jay can jump in as well. But my simple answer for the research committee was that some of the research committee were very strongly focused on geographic representation. And what you're talking about in terms of an at-large system wouldn't ensure some level of geographic representation as separate from other sorts of representation. That's my simple answer. Jay, I don't know what else.
Yeah, I can also speak to that. Yeah, so the 2 sort of extremes that you might think about in terms of this system would be a bunch of single member districts versus all citywide elected, even if they're proportional. And even with that, what the districts do is they guarantee geographic representation based on these regions. Single member districts would only guarantee geographic representation and ignore several other concerns that the residents of the city have. But an only at large system, even if it were proportional, you might be more likely to end up with someone from East Portland, but there's no guarantee that you would have, for example, a councilor from East Portland, the same way that in the rest of Portland's history, there has been no guarantee that you'll have a councilor from East Portland in our current at-large system.
Wynn, before I go to you for the next question, I want to respond to a handful of questions in the chat and from the breakout groups related to whether or not there are forms of proportional voting other than ranked choice voting, and what other systems look like. My understanding is, and Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I've just read your reports, I wasn't in your committees, is that the committees aren't making a specific recommendation about what form of proportional voting would be used, and really seeing that as the work of the Charter Review Commission. Okay, Wynn, go ahead. Nice to see you here today.
It's wonderful to see everybody. I'm so happy to see so many people from our committee. Hi, everybody. Our Health and Public Safety Issue Committee. Anyway, what I was wondering was, say you have a district and you're going to do 3 people from that district. Should they be 1 each year, or are you going to replace them all at the same time? Or if there's 3 districts total, are you going to replace 1 from each district each year? Or like I said, or the whole district? I mean, we can't just throw out everybody and put in a whole bunch of new people we need to have some way of doing that. That's
Mark, great question. Thank you, Wynn. I know that this is something that the Charter Review Commission is definitely talking about. Mark, is this something that your committee talked about, and is this part of the vote today?
This is not part of the vote today. And I mean, so this is the issue of staggered elections and how you do that. The commission is very much taking this up, and I would urge people to sort of track what they're talking about in this regard, but it's not directly connected to at least the point of today's conversation, I would say.
Kathy, I see your hand raised.
Okay, I do have one comment. I definitely think that you should separate the changing away from the commission form of government from the form of doing the election, or you're going to end up losing both. because I think there's a good chance this one might not pass for a number of reasons, whereas I think there's general agreement on the commission getting away from the commission form. So at least make 2 packages. Please.
Kathy,
And I did have kind of a
question.
I did have a specific question of has the decision been made as to how many city council members there are? I mean, the fact that you're using 5 districts and 3 members, is that kind of the direction we're thinking of going to a 15-member city council?
Thank you for that. I know that that's also a topic of hot conversation with the Charter Review Commission. Melanie, I'm so glad that you're in the audience today. That is also not part of today's vote for City Club members. Although the committee has definitely, the first reports recommended a larger city council. The first report did not specify a number, and the amended recommendation for today is not focused on that number. It is a really important topic, though. Thank you, Kathy. I think we have time for one more question. Randy Miller, you're the lucky next contestant.
Thank you, Caitlin. I brought this up also in my breakout group, and this maybe is for Mark, relative to the hybrid form of not just having districts, but also having some at large. It's been my experience, and of course, Caitlin, you know, through my best practice trips over the last 35 years, taking a look at cities all over the country and the world, is that when you have individual districts, oftentimes represented become very insular. And instead of looking at the greater good for the entire city, they're very, very focused just on their district, and they can conflict with other ones. So had we had provision for some at large as well, we could have those people on the city council that are making sure that these decisions between them all also represent the broader interests of the city. So I wondered why that was not part of this proposal.
Mark.
The simple answer, Randy, and this is only the simple answer because there's a longer conversation we could have about it, is that the committee really felt like that though there's an argument there, the one you just made about citywide perspective, we were not convinced actually that in the city of Portland that a multi-member system would dilute the citywide perspective for members sufficiently that it would undermine sort of that city perspective. That was the first part. The second part is that there are some real questions of whether at-large systems that are hybrid with single member or multi-member systems, whether they actually create kind of 2 classes of council members that are sort of their status in the council is different because one arguably represents everybody and others represent just part of the city. And so for those reasons, and for others as well, we just didn't feel particularly comfortable with the hybrid system, but there's definitely arguments for it. I'm not in any way questioning that.
Certainly seeing it all around the country with that issue.
All right. Well, friends, community members, and City Club members, I wish we had more time. Thank you, Mark, Sol, and Jay, for sharing your expertise and perspectives with us today. Now I get to tell you all how to vote. After our voting methods conversation, you may be surprised it is not multi-winner or ranked choice. It's a simple up or down vote. If you are a member, you should have by now received an email that will allow you to cast this simple vote to accept or reject this amended recommendation about districts. If you feel the research was carried out faithfully and its conclusions follow from the findings, you can vote to approve the research. You have until tomorrow, Thursday, at 1 p.m. to cast your ballot. And our email has a little bit more background information if you feel like you need some more information before you vote. If you are not a member, it is not too late to join. You can go to pdxcityclub.org/membership to sign up, and then email info@pdxcityclub.org to have a ballot sent to you. This is the way we've done all of our online elections for the last 2 years. And I'm looking forward to a time when we can be doing this in person. Thank you again all for being part of today's conversation. And most importantly, thank you to the research committee for your hard work on this project. This was complex. It had lots of different interconnected parts, and you've done really impressive work. And thank you again to our sponsors, Chevron, The Standard, Northwest Natural, Kaiser Permanente, and Tonkin Torp for your support today.